The scent of a goosey soup drifted through the air as Mara stirred the pot, humming softly. It had been a long day at school, but cooking always calmed her. The kitchen was warm, the radio played quietly in the corner, and the children were upstairs doing homework. The clock struck 7:15 p.m., right on time for Ebery to come home. She wiped her hands on her wrapper, glanced at the table already set, and smiled to herself. No matter how distant he had become lately, she still kept the house running like clockwork. Then, headlights. Mara paused. The brightness swept across the living room curtains, then stilled. Car doors opened, muffled voices. Curious, she stepped onto the front porch. Her heart skipped. Several neighbors stood near the gate, a few elders, even the local tailor. Why was everyone here? The driver's side door slammed. Ebery emerged, dressed in his usual starched caftan, but he wasn't alone. Holding his hand was a woman, a young, stunning woman in a gold lace dress, skin flawless, eyes alert but uncertain. Ebery's face carried no shame. He raised their interlocked hands like a proud announcer introducing a prize. "Everyone," he called out, "meet my new wife. This is Amina. She'll be living here from now on." Gasps echoed from the crowd. The tailor clutched her chest. Someone muttered, "Jesu!" under their breath. Mara stood frozen. The air around her went still. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but her face remained unreadable. No tears, no visible shock, just silence, cold and deliberate. She walked down the steps toward them. Ebery looked at her, maybe bracing for a slap or a scream. Even Amina tensed slightly, but Mara only nodded, her tone measured and smooth. "Welcome, Amina," she said. "Let me show you the room." Even the birds seemed to go quiet. The crowd murmured, confused. Was this composure or madness? Ebery blinked, unsure whether to be relieved or afraid. Mara turned, her back straight, and began walking toward the house. She didn't look at Ebery, didn't acknowledge the betrayal. She just led the way, like a hostess, into a war zone only she could already see coming. The next morning, the compound was quiet. Birds chirped in the trees, and the sun filtered gently through the windows. Mara rose early, as always. She bathed, prayed, tied her wrapper, and entered the kitchen to start breakfast. The same routine, the same grace, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Flashbacks flickered in her mind as she sliced yam and boiled water for tea. 15 years ago, she had married Ebery in a modest church ceremony. He was charming then, ambitious, proud. She had seen fire in his eyes, not arrogant. They built a life together from almost nothing. He started with 2 plots of land, and she taught school full-time, helping him write proposals at night. When their first child, Uzo, was born, Ebery celebrated for a week. When their daughter Adana arrived 2 years later, he had seemed distant. By the time their youngest, Ife, came, he was spending more nights in the city than at home. Rumours came and went. Other women, hotel nights. Mara confronted him once. He denied, then shouted, then stormed out. She didn't ask again. She had stayed, for the children, for the dignity of the home, for the woman she still believed she was. In the village, Mara was known not for her loudness, but her presence. Her students stood straighter when she walked past. Neighbours sought her advice before elders. She had grace like still water, deceptively calm, deeply strong. Ebery, meanwhile, had become something else. Success had changed him. He now walked like the land belonged to him, like people owed him respect just for breathing. He donated large sums to the church, sponsored local politicians, and carried himself with the confidence of untouchability. Yet at home, he rarely spoke unless giving orders. And now, he had brought a second wife. Mara stirred the tea gently, no bitterness in her movement, no violence in her eyes. At 7:45 she called out, "Children, breakfast is ready." Then, more softly, "Amina, you may join us if you wish." Amina appeared moments later, dressed neatly in a conservative wrapper blouse. She moved like a guest, not a wife. She greeted respectfully, kept her head slightly bowed, unsure of what Mara would do. But Mara simply served her tea and said, "There's more yam if you like." Ebery entered last. He looked around the table, his family, his new bride, all seated quietly. He waited for a reaction, some protest, a quarrel, a slap, something. Nothing came. Instead, Mara said, "Uzo, you've got exams next week. Have you registered?" He nodded, barely looking up. The tension at the table was thick. Amina glanced at Mara's calm face, utterly unreadable. It was the kind of control she had never seen before. Not submission, not fear, just a quiet confidence that felt unnerving. The villagers began to whisper, "She invited the girl to dinner." Mara didn't even flinch. "She's planning something. That woman is not ordinary." By the third day, Ebere's frustration began to crack through his cool facade. One evening, as Mara folded laundry, he stood in the doorway watching her. "You've said nothing. Is this how you deal with things now?" he asked, voice tight. Mara looked up, folding a towel neatly. "What should I say, Ebere? You've made your choice. I'm only adapting." He scoffed, eyes narrowing. "You think this makes you look strong?" Mara tilted her head. "Number, I think it makes me look free." And with that, she turned back to her folding. Amina, listening from the hallway, felt her chest tighten. She had thought herself clever, escaping poverty by marrying a powerful man. But now, she lived in a house where the first wife said nothing, and yet ruled everything. The power Mara held was not loud, but it was complete. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the living room smelled of furniture polish and fresh air. The windows were open, letting in the soft rustle of the neem trees outside. The children were called downstairs. The elders had already arrived: Uncle Sylvester, Ebere's older cousin, and Mama Naka from the next compound, a respected village elder. Amina sat quietly on the far end of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. Ebere paced near the window, frowning. Mara stood in the center of the room, composed and quiet, wearing a simple blue wrapper and blouse. No makeup, no jewelry, just her calm, unwavering presence. "I've called you all here because it's time we stop pretending everything is normal," she began. Her voice was clear, no tremble, no rage, just absolute control. Everyone turned to look at her, the children stilled. Even Ebere stopped pacing. "I won't fight over a man," she said, eyes scanning the room, "but I won't be disrespected in my own house." Ebere opened his mouth to speak, but she lifted her hand gently, and somehow he stopped. "From today," Mara continued, "I resign from the role of wife." A murmur swept through the room. "I will no longer serve or answer to Eba in that capacity. I will not lie to myself or my children. I am not your co-wife. I am the mother of my children and the woman of this house, and I will live as such." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small key ring, and walked to Amina. Calmly, she placed the bedroom keys in her palm. "You may have the master bedroom. It's yours now." Amina stared at her in disbelief. Her hand trembled as it closed around the keys. Without another word, Mara turned and walked upstairs. 10 minutes later, she returned with 2 small travel bags. Nothing dramatic, just the essentials: toothbrush, Bible, pillow, a few wrappers. She walked past the shocked eyes of her children and the confused silence of the elders and entered the guest room. That evening, while Ebere brooded alone in the courtyard, Mara was in her study, laptop open. With quiet efficiency, she logged into the household bank accounts and changed the passwords. Then she emailed the estate lawyer. Subject: title transfer request. Body: as discussed previously, I'd like to initiate the final stage of property reconsolidation. All 3 land titles, including the home, should remain under my legal ownership as trustee for the children. Ebere may retain access for now, pending final separation. She hit send. By the next morning, everything had changed. The bank accounts had shifted. The land, every square foot, was already in Mara's name, a precaution she had taken years ago when Ebere's affairs began to multiply. Now, she simply made it official. Amina's first shock came when she attempted to withdraw funds to furnish her new room, and the card declined. Ebere's came hours later when his lawyer called, puzzled. "Chief, did your wife just file updated deeds listing herself as sole owner?" That night, the storm broke. Ebere barged into Mara's guest room, eyes blazing. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. "Are you trying to disgrace me in front of this village, in front of my children?" Mara didn't look up from her book. "No," she said, her voice even. "I'm just giving you what you wanted. Freedom." He moved closer, nostrils flaring. "You think you can just erase me?" Now she looked up, calm, firm. "I'm not erasing you, Ebere. I'm stepping aside. You brought another woman into my life without a word. I won't fight over you, but I won't let you dictate mine anymore." He stared at her, searching for weakness, for a tear, for a quiver. There was none. She closed her book. "You have your wife. You have your house. But never forget, you built it on land I own. And with that, she turned off the lamp and lay down. Ebere stood frozen in the doorway, powerless for the first time in years. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that tense, charged way that made the walls seem thinner. Amina wandered through the house like a guest overstaying her welcome. The children, Uzo, Adana and Ife, greeted her politely but never lingered. They ate quickly, did their chores and disappeared to their rooms or to Mara's study, where she sometimes helped them with homework or simply sat with them, silently, calmly. Amina tried. She really did. She greeted the maids with a smile, asked how to prepare ogbono soup, even tried to organize the pantry. But the house rejected her, inch by inch. The maids, long-time loyal staff, did only what Mara instructed. If Amina asked for assistance, they'd nod vaguely and then forget. One even said gently, "Sorry, madam, I don't know that arrangement." Madam Mara always handles those things. Even the food tasted strange. The ogbono never thickened right. The jollof rice she cooked was left mostly untouched. Worse, when she walked to the market, women whispered and turned. "There goes the second wife," they murmured. She took the husband, but the first wife kept everything. She didn't even shout. That Mara, she's dangerous in silence. It was true. Mara didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't compete. She just remained, and somehow her quiet presence swallowed the house whole. Ebere noticed the shift too. He would come home, and meals wouldn't be ready. Laundry wasn't folded. His usual shirts weren't ironed. When he asked why, the maid said calmly, "Madam Mara no longer handles that, sir. She gave us new routines. Perhaps you can ask Madam Amina." He'd storm off, but no one followed. Mara's new role was something else entirely. She woke early, dressed in fitted blouses and straight skirts, and left by 7:30 sharp. At the school, she had been quietly climbing the ladder for years, but the chaos at home seemed to light a fire in her. She began arriving early, staying late, rewriting policies. Within 3 weeks, the principal retired early. Mara was named the new head mistress. At the announcement, the staff burst into applause. One teacher whispered, "She doesn't just teach, she leads," and she did. She introduced a mentorship club for young girls called the Quiet Backbone. Each week, she taught sessions on land rights, co-ownership laws, and why a woman should know every PIN, password, and property paper in her home. It spread fast. Women came from other villages. Some whispered her name like a prayer. At home, Ebere's own kingdom began to crumble. A land deal he had neglected years ago, one Mara had warned him about, resurfaced. The boundary had never been properly registered. The original documents, missing. And Mara, who had managed his files before, no longer had any reason to protect them. He tried to reach his lawyer. The man was polite, firm. "Chief, without clear documentation, the court might not rule in your favor." Ebere slammed his phone down that day so hard it cracked. Amina watched him unravel slowly. The confident man who strutted through town now sat brooding, snapping at everyone, cursing the air. Still, Mara said nothing. One evening, after another awkward dinner, Amina followed Mara into the corridor. She hesitated, then asked, "Can I speak with you?" Mara paused. "Go ahead." Amina wrung her hands. I don't understand. Why aren't you angry?" Mara looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were sharp, but not cruel. Then she said softly but firmly, "Because rage is a gift I won't give a man who betrayed me." Amina's breath caught. The hallway felt colder. She nodded slowly and stepped back, retreating into her room like a child who'd touched a flame. But the words, they didn't stay in that hallway. The next morning, the tailor's apprentice repeated them at the market. Then the herbalist quoted it to a client. Soon it was on everyone's lips. "Rage is a gift I won't give a man who betrayed me." By week's end, it had become a kind of proverb. Women repeated it to each other in hushed tones, laughter, even tears. Mara never said it again. She didn't need to. The village had heard it once, and it echoed like thunder. The letter arrived with a government seal. Ebere tore it open, assuming it was routine paperwork, until he saw the heading, High Court of Owerri, Civil Hearing Notification. His eyes scanned the lines, heartbeat rising. Plaintiff, Mara Ogadinma Ebere Defendant, Ebere Okeki. Case, petition for equitable distribution of marital contributions and unpaid labor within business enterprise. His hands trembled. He stormed into the house, waving the letter. Mara, what is this nonsense? She looked up from her laptop, calm as ever. It's not nonsense, it's math and memory. Days later, they stood in court, under heavy air and whispers. The judge, a woman in black robes and rimless glasses, took her seat. Ebere narrowed his eyes. Wait, isn't that… Mara nodded slightly, just once. Yes, that's Justice Nkem. She was in my English class. I taught her to speak without apology. The courtroom listened as Mara's lawyer laid out her case with clean precision. 15 years of unpaid labor, helping draft contracts, attending site visits, maintaining accounts during the startup years, bank transfer records showing her deposits into the business before it turned profitable, emails with vendors and staff, photographs and signed receipts of land purchases she initiated on Ebere's behalf, line after line, page after page. Ebere's lawyer glanced at him repeatedly, growing paler each time. You never told me she had this kind of documentation, he whispered. I didn't think she kept it, Ebere muttered. Mara sat tall, dignified. Every word she spoke was soft but clear. Not once did she raise her voice. Justice Nkem leaned forward. Mr. Okeke, you benefited from your wife's silent work for over a decade. That silence doesn't make the work invisible. By the end of the hearing, the ruling was swift. 40% of Ebere's business assets were to be transferred into a protected trust under Mara's name for the sole benefit of their children. He was to maintain operations, but could no longer make unilateral financial decisions. The court froze certain accounts and demanded transparency on all future expenditures. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Even the stenographer raised her eyebrows. Ebere sat frozen. Outside, in the tiled hallway, he caught up with her. You plotted this, he hissed. All this time, you were planning to destroy me. Mara turned, meeting his eyes. No fury, no triumph, just stillness. No, she said quietly. This was me remembering my worth. Ebere stared at her, jaw clenched. You were just a teacher. You had nothing without me. Mara gave him the faintest smile. I gave you peace, legacy, and reputation, and you gambled it for ego. Now I'm giving myself back to me. She walked away, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Later that night, the compound was silent. Amina sat at the edge of the bed she once proudly entered with fanfare. She folded her wrapper slowly, hands unsteady. She had watched everything, the public unraveling, the power shift, the humiliation. She knew now. She was brought in to be a second queen, but had become a footnote in someone else's coronation. Without a word, she packed a small bag, took a cab back to her aunt's house in Owerri, and never returned. Ebere sat alone in the master bedroom, staring at the walls Mara had once decorated, walls that no longer listened to him. The compound was quiet the morning the for sale sign went up. A few neighbours stood across the street, whispering behind folded arms. Mara stepped out with the realtor, handed over the final papers, and didn't look back. She'd already divided the proceeds. Ebere received his legal share, a figure that burned his pride more than it blessed his bank account. He accepted the cheque with a blank expression, no words. He'd stopped arguing weeks ago. Mara didn't stay another night in the village. By the next weekend, she was settling into a sleek, 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of Owerri. High ceilings, clean walls, glass windows that let in sunlight like truth. It was nothing like the old house. No heavy curtains, no portraits of someone else's ancestors. This space belonged to her. She named her new foundation the Silent Power Initiative, a centre focused on educating women about land rights, financial independence, and marital legal protections. Within the first month, over 80 women signed up for evening workshops. Lawyers volunteered time. Former students returned just to say thank you. She worked late most nights, not from exhaustion, but from fire. For the first time in years, her work felt like hers, not a hidden labour behind someone else's success. Word of Mara's foundation reached the village faster than expected. People gossiped, as they always did, but this time they whispered with reverence. Did you hear? She's on radio now, giving advice to women. Her school club has spread to other towns. They say she bought land in Enugu for a second branch. Meanwhile, Ebere stayed in the same house, now quiet and echoing. No wife, no children, business half-stalled. and every time he walked past the barber shop or the market square, someone always seemed to mutter, "The one his first wife destroyed." Without even shouting, he would pretend not to hear, but the words clung. Back in Owerri, Mara sat one evening on her small balcony, sipping tea, her daughter, Adana, curled up beside her with a book. After a quiet moment, the girl looked up. "You're laughing more, Mum, even when no one says anything funny." Mara smiled into the dusk. "Because I stopped living small for someone else's ego." And for the first time in years, she laughed loudly, unapologetically, the kind of laugh that didn't ask permission. The sun was high as Mara stepped out of the black SUV, dressed in a deep emerald lace gown that shimmered under the light. Her jail was wrapped with regal precision, and her eyes, hidden behind sleek sunglasses, scanned the familiar village square now adorned with wedding canopies and plastic chairs. Whispers rose like wind through tall grass. "She's here. That's Madame Mara. Still walks like a queen, eh?" Women rushed toward her, not out of gossip, but in quiet reverence. They shook her hand, hugged her lightly, thanked her. "Because of you, I opened my own shop," said one. "I made my husband add my name to our land title," said another. "I didn't stay silent this time," whispered a third. Then, a young woman in her 20s leaned in and smiled with mischief. "My husband wanted a second wife," she said, chuckling. "But I told him, remember what happened to Mr. Ibre?" The women around them burst into knowing laughter. Mara smiled, slow and warm. She adjusted her sunglasses with effortless grace and began walking through the crowd. Her heels clicked softly on the stone path. She didn't need to speak. She never did. Children paused their games to wave. Even the elders nodded in acknowledgement. As she disappeared into the festive crowd, her posture never faltered. Tall, unbothered, complete. Voiceover. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She just knew her worth and made the world remember it too. Hi besties. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.